Welcome back to the Calculated Risk podcast. We are a day late this week. I apologize. I was sick all day on Sunday when we normally record, and Kelly was gracious enough to push back so that we could both do the show, and he didn't have to do it solo. We saw a really entertaining, in my opinion, week 9. We had some really important games this time of year. I mean, every week we're learning so much. The season's taking shape. I mean, Oregon goes into Rice Eccles and just dominates Utah, which I don't know that anybody really expected. I mean, my numbers were high on Oregon going into that game, but man, they completely shut them down. Uh, Washington, looked immortal for the second straight week. Ohio State goes on the road, gets a 2-score win at Wisconsin. Penn State struggles with Indiana. I mean, there was a lot going on this weekend. Kelly, what were your initial takeaways from week 9?
Yeah, Tyler. Well, first off, you said I was gracious to, wait a day and not do it solo. Like, dude, never a problem, one. But two, if either of us do this solo, it's not calculated risk for me. Like, to me, calculated risk has to be both of us. So yeah, it was no worries. I'm glad you're feeling better. That is the most important thing for sure, because we're in the middle of the grind, man. This season, it's long, but we love it, and it'll be over soon before we know it. So it's important to get right, get healthy, and come back strong now. So yeah, as we recap week 9 here, for me, the biggest takeaways, Tyler, is I'm looking at which teams improve their resume the most, because at this point of the season, that's where I like looking there all the time, but at this point of the season, that's where everybody else is tending to look too, with the CFP selection committee coming out with their rankings. So if I look at my kind of quote best wins from the weekend, how about Kansas at home over Oklahoma? That was a huge win for the Jayhawks, not just for this year, but just program building. I mean, what Leipold is doing, I've tweeted about this and I maintain it. He is on statue track. Like, it's only been 2 years. So you can't build a statue for someone after 2 years, but this will be the first time I think I saw ever that Kansas is going bowling in consecutive years. He is doing things at Kansas that it's been a long time since we've seen, at least over the course of multiple years. So there, by no means is Kansas going to win the national championship this year, but when the program's been as bad as Kansas has been, he comes in and turns things around. Man, Kansas with a great win. Oregon, you mentioned it. How about that? Going into Rice Eccles, only the first time outside of the COVID year that Utah
Yeah.
has lost at home since 2018. So just a great win for Utah. They look like a top 5 team. We're going to get to that here in a second, our updated power ratings. So that was another really good win. And then as I continue down the list here, there weren't many others in that camp that got it done. But those are the two that stood out to me the most. About NC State getting the win as well. Arizona is a new look team. I'll tell you about that down in Tucson. So yeah, those are kind of the teams that stuck out to me, Tyler. But overall, a really fun week 9, a lot of big games. And week 10, only going to get even bigger as we get closer to the end of the year here.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, Oklahoma losing, that was a back and forth. That was a really, really good game. I think that probably ends Dylan Gabriel's Heisman campaign. Um, Probably ends Oklahoma's national championship hopes. I mean, we'll see,
No, if
but
they
they
go 12-1 and win the Big 12, Tyler, they're going to be in.
well, yeah, I guess technically it doesn't, but I think my point is more like in practicality, they looked really mediocre against UCF last week out of the bye, and then they lose outright. So they just haven't been right really since the Texas game. So I would say, Oklahoma and Washington are two teams that I kind of have my eye on as like kind of trending the wrong way right now. Washington's had back to back kind of close-ish calls with Arizona State and Stanford this past weekend. So we'll see. Like no, Oklahoma's hopes technically on paper are not dead, certainly, but they're going to have to play much better football if they're going to have a chance to win the Big 12 and potentially go to the CFP.
Agree with
With
that for
that though,
sure.
let's get into our updated power ratings and see kind of how everything shook out from a rating standpoint after this week. We mentioned last week our numbers for the most part are kind of coming into focus and being more lockstep. We do have some kind of discrepancies. You mentioned Liberty. I've got them at number 21. Where'd you say you have them? Like in the 40s?
Actually, so from a power rating standpoint, which is what we're talking about right now, power rating standpoint, I have them number 56. So still not, a top 50 team yet for me, but yeah, I see them up there, number 21 for you. The Flames doing well.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a team we talked about. My numbers were really high on them coming into the year, which makes sense why we're at this point now with the discrepancy we have. But I mean, they've been excellent. Not only have they, they're undefeated, obviously, but from a against the spread standpoint, like Vegas has been too low on them more often than not so far. I mean, they've covered game after game after game this year, including blowing out Western Kentucky here in the last week or two. All my weeks are running together at this point, but yeah. So Liberty, a team I've been high on throughout. They continue to look good. So hopefully they keep that up. Duke still hanging around at number 16 for me after getting shut out by Louisville. I mean, they kind of had some room there because they had gotten up so high initially. So I don't love that. That's one of those where I'm like, okay, I see which way they're trending. If I could make manual adjustments, I would definitely knock them down a couple of pegs here. I don't love having them at 16. LSU were you actually have them rated higher by about 2 points, one spot in the rankings. I've got them number 9. You've got them number 8. As they had two Bryant Denny Stadium this weekend and the biggest game of the SEC West season for sure. So so looking at your ratings, you make that what, like Bama minus 2.5 or 3?
Yeah, somewhere in that range, probably 2.5-ish, because they have the exact same power rating. I actually have 3 teams, Tyler: Texas, LSU, Alabama, all with a 22.0 power rating. Like when that spat out, I was like, hold on. I double checked it. It is right. I don't remember a time where I've had 3 teams, especially in the top 10, that all have the same power rating down or rounded to the nearest 10th of a football point per game. So, yeah, that was interesting. So those 2 teams, very, very similar from a power rating standpoint for me. But yes, I would make Alabama with the home field a favorite here. Looking at yours, Tyler, I mean, I don't imagine your home field is almost 4 points. So I guess you're leaning LSU actually win that game outright.
Yeah, I've got LSU by a point in this week. And what's funny is as I'm looking at this, we both have Texas and LSU with the exact same rating. That's funny. I mean, considering we round to the nearest 10th, it's funny that shook out that way. So model's definitely in alignment on those 2 teams, both in the top 10. Penn State, I mentioned them off the top. I mean, they really struggled with Indiana, and I tweeted this. I swear, I didn't actually go back and do the research, so maybe this is just like one of those confirmation bias things. But it seems to me that every single year, Penn State just like empties the chamber against Ohio State, and then they lay an absolute egg the week after that. Every single year, most notably, the 2017 game that was crazy, 39-38. I was at that game. The next week, Ohio State goes and gets blown out by Iowa, and Penn State loses to Michigan State, and it's like, well, all that for nothing. So, I mean, they look for a little bit there, like they might actually lose to Indiana this week. They did pull it out. I think
it was tied with 2 minutes left, Tyler. 2 minutes left in the game, the score was tied. It was crazy.
I mean,
that's
unbelievable.
No, and I'm with you. And it's not just Penn State and Ohio State. I mean, you see it across college football week in, week out, year in, year out. You've got these scheduling dynamic spots. And we've talked about it before, Tyler. There's things that the model can't capture and account for. Scheduling dynamics, at least for me, is one of those things where you talk about there's all sorts of different kinds of games. You've got, trap games where you've just had a big week last week and you've got another big week coming up in a week, but you got that game in between. You got the look ahead spot where, hey, next week's opponent's a really big one. This one, not so much. And then you've got the game where you're caught, either basking in the glory of a great win or letting the opponent that just beat you once beat you again because it's a letdown game after a big game. That's what we're talking about here with Penn State against Indiana. Like, there's all sorts of these things. You got, which teams are coming out of their off weeks versus which ones aren't. Like, so you have rest advantages. Who has to travel across the country, multiple time zones? Is the game on a Thursday night? So does someone come off of short rest? So there's all those things we talk about in the NFL. We don't talk about as much in college, I don't think, and I'm not sure why. Either that or I'm just not paying attention to those that do. But I think it's really, really important. And yeah, that's something that, again, the models aren't going to capture, but viewers of the model, fans of the game who use the models as just one of the tools to try to evaluate teams and evaluate matchups, you have to account for these things because it is real. And we see it time and time again across the country, across conferences, every team. in some shape or fashion is caught in at least one of these games every single year. So it's human nature. It's not just football. It's not just college kids. Everybody, every day in their daily lives, it's possible to let one bad day at work bleed into two. It's possible to let one great day at work take your eye off the ball the next day, right? So it happens all the time. But it is definitely interesting in college football, and Penn State is a good example in recent years, the game after Ohio State.
Yeah, and I mean, if you read my work at VSiN.com, where I publish my weekly college best bets, I talk about that quite a bit, the situational spots. And I have people message me all the time like, hey, your numbers indicate there's a big discrepancy on this game. Why are you not betting it? And it's like, well, they just came off of this huge win. They're in a letdown spot this week. Like, I don't, the model, like you said, Kelly, doesn't account for that. But I mean, especially if you're betting these games, like putting your money on it, you have to factor that stuff in. So no model, is perfect. No model is going to capture all the nuances of the sport. So definitely encourage you to like look at scheduling dynamics, like Kelly said, because that's huge, especially when you're talking about college kids. Back to the ratings. I mean, SMU is a team we talked before we recorded. I mean, SMU is another team that TSI has been crazy high on, like uncomfortably high on at some points this season. But they continue to win and look impressive doing so. I mean, they hung a 50 burger in the first half on Kevin Wilson in Tulsa this past week, which was like absurd. I tweeted, I joked in the first quarter and was like, "Are they going to score 100?" And then when they got 52 in the first half, I was like, "Whoa, I was kidding."
They could have
So
though if they kept the foot on the gas.
they seem to be for real. They're my top rated G5 team. So I mean, definitely keep an eye on SMU. As we evaluate New Year's Six bowl games for sure.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, Tyler. I've got SMU number 19. They're up a few spots for me. They are the class of the G5 this year. I know that in the preseason, I mean, they actually were they had the highest projected conference win total in the American because their schedule set up a little bit easier than Tulane's. I had Tulane as a better power rated team. SMU's been in that kind of number one seed spot in the American, though, from the beginning of the year, and they've just strengthened their grip on that for me and my number. So definitely keep an eye on them as I'm looking at other G5s that I have. None other than the top 30, as you can see on the screen here for those watching on YouTube. But after that, I got Air Force at number 38 coming in there, Tulane's at 44, James Madison at 46, still having a great year, are the Dukes. Troy's at 47, South Alabama number 50, and I already mentioned Liberty at number 56. So those are some of my G5s that are up there. No surprise, talked about it all year. You have a couple more in your top 30, and you're a bit higher on the G5s than I am. A couple of those, though, as we talk about SMU, Liberty, certainly showing well for the TSI, that's for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I love. I bet Liberty against Western Kentucky again. Whenever that game was I think it was last weekday, last Wednesday or something like that. Those wins are huge for the model and are why not any individual game, but the collection of those games have generally gone my way this year, which is really encouraging in terms of how I'm adjusting my formula every off season. So glad to see that some of these teams that coming into the season I was high on, that's paying off. Now, obviously, there are plenty of teams that goes the other way on, and they completely lay eggs, and I look terrible. So it goes both ways. Like I said, no model's perfect, but I have enjoyed seeing Liberty and SMU and some of these teams, really have good seasons so far. Kansas State, another team playing dominant football right now. Huge one with Texas this week. Texas without Quinn Ewers. I think Kansas State might win. I know we'll get into that on the Thursday show, but I think Kansas State might get it done this week against Texas, but we'll see. Kelly, anything else stick out from the power rating standpoint before we get into our most deserving resume rankings?
I think the final thing, Tyler, and those that are watching can see it. We have the same top three teams in order now. Michigan number 1, Ohio State number 2, Oregon number 3. We both have Florida State in the top 5, Penn State in the top 6 for both of us. So I think at the top, we're in pretty close alignment. Again, the gap for you between Michigan at number 1 and Oregon at number 3 is 6 points. For me, That gap between Michigan and Oregon 1 and 3 is about 4.5 points. So a little bit more of a gap on your side. Michigan a little bit higher power rated for you at 30.4. They're 27.8 for me. But regardless, I think things are really starting to take shape. Oregon is definitely a team to keep an eye on. They've lost their margin of error since they lost on the road at Washington, but they are certainly playing like the best team in the Pac-12 and one of the best teams in the country by both of our numbers right now. So we'll see if the Ducks can finish it out the regular season unscathed to make it to that Pac-12 championship game, because if they get there, I think they'd be a favorite. But the power ratings at this point of the year, they are what they are. And you say it all the time, the numbers are what the numbers are. By this point of the season, they are what they are. They're not changing too much. You talked about some teams trending, but it takes a lot to move teams significant distances this far into the season. And committee unveils their rankings on Tuesday this week. And so I know we're going to talk some resume rankings. It's that time of year.
Yeah. Last thought on the power ratings. I think, gun to my head right now, I think Oregon is going to make the playoff. I think we're going to see Oregon. If I had to pencil teams in right now, I would pencil in Oregon, Florida State, Ohio State, Michigan winner, and SEC winner. I think that's the four. Obviously, that can all blow up in my face this weekend. I think LSU is going to have, again, I project LSU as a 1-point favorite at Bama this weekend. I think they're going to have a chance to give Bama kind of the knockout blow. Georgia looked really good against Florida this week. How good is Florida? We'll see. Like we mentioned last week, Georgia's got a couple real teams coming up here. They play A&M, which is not going to be easy. They play Ole Miss. So we're going to find out a little bit more about Georgia too. So I might be singing a different tune on Georgia. Right now, I'm still kind of in wait-and-see mode. All right, on to the most deserving and resume rankings. Kelly, I want us to run through our top 10 each, and then just kind of give our thoughts on what we think the committee is going to do. By the time people are hearing this, it'll be within hours of when they get the committee rankings. So I'll let you go ahead and start us off. What's your top 10 most deserving? Okay, you're muted.
There we go. So top 10 here, Tyler. Sorry about that. After week 9, the top 2 remain unchanged. I've got Ohio State number 1. I've got Florida State number 2. Washington moves up to number 3. I used to have Oklahoma in that spot. We'll see where the Sooners tumbled to. Texas up 2 spots from number 6. They are now my number 4. Alabama holds at number 5. I tweeted about this, Tyler. In the time I've been doing the most deserving rankings, I have never had a gap between 4 and 5 this small. The way that I scale this is 4 always has a raw deserving number of 1.0. Like that, the number 4 team in the country and the most deserving is always 100% worthy of inclusion in the CFP. That's kind of how you can interpret the raw number. So it's always a 1. I have never in my time doing this had the number 5 team have a 0.999. That's where Alabama is right now. They are 0.999. That is one thousandth of a point behind Texas in that number 4 spot. So Alabama holds steady at number 5. I'm glad this is the first week of the CFP rankings and the first week of November, not the first week of December, because I would really struggle to have 2 teams separated by that distance there. Ole Miss up 1 spot to number 6. Georgia up 2 spots after their win over Florida at the neutral site to number 7. Here's Oklahoma at number 8. They fell from number 3. I still have Oklahoma number 8, though. The AP had them number 6 going into that game with Kansas this past week. I don't know where the AP has them now. I really don't. But I'm sure they're farther down. I'm sure they're farther down than 8, though. It bothers me to the nth degree when teams that, quote, lose late. And I would say by week 9, you're getting kind of late in the year. You're like, well, they have to fall because they lost. Like, that's not necessarily true, especially late in the year.
Yeah.
Let's say Ohio State, and this would happen last year too with Ohio State undefeated going into the Michigan. Let's say Ohio State continues to win. Maybe another contender or 2 falls around them. If Ohio State loses to Michigan in the last game of the season, just because their 1 loss came in week 13 doesn't necessarily mean that they need to fall behind other teams that lost earlier in the year. The timing of the loss should not matter. Like, it bothers me so much that timing
Yeah.
of loss seems to play a factor for so many voters. And the CFP committee will see, but the AP poll is like, well, you lost late. See ya. Like, because Oklahoma lost this week, they drop them way down. It's like, well, sure, they fall a little bit because their resume got dinged a little bit. You lost to Kansas, a team that, the average top 25 team would have beaten even on the road, or would have been expected to beat with a plus 50% win expectancy. But and other teams around them improve their resumes. Oklahoma's resume is still really good, though. So they're still number 8 for me. Michigan, they're number 9. They fall one spot because Georgia jumped above them here. So Michigan's number 9 for me. And then Oregon. I had Oregon at number 16 last week. I know the AP had them at number 8 or something like that. I had them at 16. They jump all the way up to number 6 now because that was a good win on the road at Utah. So that's my top 10. Ohio State, Florida State, Washington, Texas, Alabama, Ole Miss, Georgia, Oklahoma, Michigan, and Oregon. Those are my top 10, Tyler, in the most deserving this week.
Interesting. We are pretty similar on most of these. I do have a couple of differences in mind. So I'm gonna run through my top 10 quickly, and then I'm gonna to add some manual adjustment that I made based on the concept that we've talked about before, where head-to-heads matter if it doesn't affect other teams. So I'm gonna run through mine, and then I'm gonna explain a manual adjustment that I did make. So Ohio State jumped up to number 1. They were number 2 for me last week. Ohio State with the win at Wisconsin jumps up to number 1. Florida State number 2. I actually have Michigan number 3, and I think this is where. So their strength of schedule is by far the lowest of anyone in the top 10. I'm sorry, anyone in the top 8 for me. However, I do slightly factor in margin of victory, and their margin of victory is off the charts, obviously, compared to other teams. So I think that's what's holding Michigan up here a little bit. So Michigan's number 3, Washington number 4, Alabama number 5, Texas number 6, Oklahoma, Ole Miss, Georgia, and James Madison. Now, what I did, because of the way it shook out with Alabama 5, Texas 6, Oklahoma 7, I reshuffled those based on head-to-head because the resumes were similar. It doesn't affect anyone else, so I reshuffled that to Oklahoma, Texas, Alabama based on head-to-head results. So I think that's a fair way to do it. It didn't affect anyone else. I gave deference to how it actually played out on the field for similar resumes.
I would say, Tyler, that, and I like that. I like when you're willing to look at the numbers and say, okay, can I make a swap that doesn't affect other teams to honor a head-to-head? I think that's fair. I would say for yours, dude, to be honest, I wouldn't have made it because did I hear you right? You had Alabama, then Texas, then Oklahoma. That was the order.
Yep. Yep.
So essentially, you flopped Oklahoma and Alabama. Is that right?
Yes.
So to me, I wouldn't have made the change because now I've sent Alabama down 2 spots instead of just 1 to honor that head-to-head.
Yeah.
So to me, I wouldn't have done it, but I understand why you did, and it's not the end of the world, especially at this point of the season. But that's kind of my philosophy on the swaps. It's very rare for me to make swaps, very rare. And I had 2 last week because Texas and Alabama were right next to each other with Alabama ahead by the most deserving rankings. I said, okay, Texas, you can move ahead of them. That's just one team flipping over one. And I also had Missouri and LSU last week. I had Missouri 11, LSU 12. So I said, okay, I can swap those 2 to honor the head-to-head of LSU winning. I can't make that swap this week because Penn State, after their win against Indiana, moved from 13 to 12. LSU, who did not play, fell from 12 to 13. So now Penn State is in between Missouri and LSU. Can't make that swap anymore because I'm not going to reward or punish Penn State for something that has nothing to do with them. So I kept Missouri 11, Penn State 12, LSU 13. So the team that you have in the top 10 that I don't is James Madison. The Dukes, they picked up another win, but they actually fell in my most deserving. They fell from number 14 to number 16. Notre Dame moved past the Dukes, as did Oregon. Those are the 2 teams that moved past the Dukes for me this week, and James Madison is now number 16. Still my highest ranked group of 5 team. Other G5 teams that I have in the top 30, Tyler, I've got Air Force up 2 spots to number 21. I've got Liberty up 7 spots to number 24. Tulane holds steady at number 25, and those are my G5s in the top 30.
I also have those in mine at, higher than you. I've actually got Liberty 11, Air Force 15, and Tulane 17. So I have them higher, but again, those are the only G5s that I have in the top 30 of the resume rankings. So we're pretty close on most of those, especially at the top. And then again, like it's just it's very clear at this point. Like our formulas are just different in how we evaluate G5s, which is fine and honestly makes for a really fun conversation and fun, week to week analysis of like how it went. So it's really, I think it's really cool when both of our models like this have multiple G5s, especially from a resume standpoint, up
Hmm.
in the top 30. I think that adds credence because, and I mentioned my manual adjustments here on these. I don't ever manually adjust my power ratings, but with the resume rankings, one,
Right.
again, that's not my primary focus with my numbers, but two, I try to approach it like, okay, this is what in theory the AP or the CFP committee should be doing is like, okay, these are the resumes. Now let's see if it makes actual common sense. And so that's the way I try to approach it. And I'm pretty comfortable with how this shook out. I mean, if you wanted to tell me, like, I've got Penn State a spot below Liberty. Like, if you wanted to tell me Penn State should be ahead of Liberty, I certainly wouldn't argue too hard on that. But overall, I'm pretty happy with it. I'm happy that there's G5 representation in there, as I think there should be in a resume style ranking. So that's who we've got in our top 10 slash top 30. Kelly, what do you think the committee is going to do on Tuesday? Who do you think the top four are going to be when the committee reveals this on Tuesday night?
So we got some new committee members, right? Every year, a couple people shuffle off and new folks come on. So we don't know exactly what this committee is going to do, but we know historically kind of what the committee has looked at and what they've done. I really think the committee is going to have Ohio State number one. I do. I think because this makes me sick, but the committee is going to say, well, they've got two really quality ranked wins. They've got wins against Notre Dame and Penn State, and those are two teams that we have ranked. Which actually, Tyler, I want to spend a second on this. The committee always talks about their top 20 record against top 25 and ranked wins, and makes me sick. But bear with me for a second. Put that aside. How do they know what ranked wins are when they're evaluating the top? Because they go top down. So they start at number
Yeah,
one. How do you know that a team's going to end up like if you're talking about, well, like a team that's going to end up at number 22, 3, 4, 5, or just outside? If you're debating at the top, hey, does this team have an extra ranked win because that fringe top 25 team? We don't know. The committee hasn't worked their way down the list yet. So, like when they're
yeah,
talking about ranked wins, it's fair to assume Penn State and Notre Dame are going to be ranked by the committee. So, like those are obvious
yeah,
ones. But what about a team like Oregon State or USC or an Iowa or a Duke or North Carolina, the Kansas State? These teams that are like closer to that 20 to 30 range. If you're looking at resumes of teams that have beaten those teams, how do you know if it's a ranked win when you're at the top of your process as they're going through the voting? That's a question that I have that I've never really had an answer to. But anyway, the committee's going to like Ohio State's quote ranked wins. It is what it is. I think they're going to be number one. I think that's where they should be, though. After that, I hope the committee puts Florida State number two. I hope they do because I
I
think
I do
Florida
too.
State Florida State has the resume that would reflect the number two team in the country. The Florida State's going to be in the top four. I think they're going to be in the top three. The question is that everyone's talked about it is what's the committee going to do with Georgia and Michigan? Like to
That
me,
that that's my biggest question. Yeah,
if you want to put Michigan in the top four, like my numbers don't support it at all. I have Michigan number 9, but Michigan is number one in my relative scoring margin. You talk about them being number one in your margin of victory. They're number one in my relative scoring margin. So that's a component of the most deserving. So they are beating teams by more than they're expected to beat the team. So that's good for Michigan. They're also my number one power rated team. Again, rankings should not be power ratings. But if we're talking about how the committee's thinking about this, they passed the proverbial eye test because this is the best team in the country by the ratings. So Michigan
yep.
could be there. Georgia's not a top 4 team in either metric, any of my metrics. So
Right, that's my
like
issue.
if they put Georgia in there, they're putting Georgia in there because they're the 2-time reigning national champs. They've only lost one game since November of 2020. Like that's why Georgia would be in the top 4. And to me, I don't buy that. Like that's not acceptable
No,
because we're ranking teams in 23. Not the Georgia 2023 Georgia should not be getting credit for 2021 and 2022 Georgia's accomplishment. They just shouldn't. Now I understand the AP poll is giving them that, and that's human nature. The committee should not do that. I hope they don't. Ohio State, Florida State, I think Michigan's going to be in the committee's top 4 because they're going to say they're just playing like one of the best teams in the country. I don't disagree with that, but they don't have the resume to support being there yet. If Michigan State takes care of business down the stretch here against Penn State, Ohio State, and these other teams that they're playing, Michigan's going to be in my top 4 most deserving. Don't you worry about that. It'll take care of itself. But if we're ranking teams on what they've accomplished so far, they shouldn't be. I think they're in there. And then I think the committee's going to put Washington in there. And again, I have Washington number 3, but they're going to look. I don't think the committee's going to put a team with 1 loss in the top 4 at this stage in this year because we have right now 5 undefeated Power 5 teams. I would put Texas at number 4 because I think they are deserving of being number 4, but I don't think the committee is going to do that. I think the committee is going to have Ohio State, Florida State, Michigan, Washington. If I had to guess, that would be the order that I would guess they put them in. And again, I don't have any huge gripes with that. The gripe will come in as it would have come in last year for me. And I know I've gone too long, Tyler, but it came in last year. USC did not deserve to be in the top 4 going into conference championship game weekend. I think I had them number 8. The committee had them number 4. Thankfully, USC lost to Utah. And I say thankfully, not from an Ohio State standpoint. It's really not. It's from a fairness standpoint. You could have put any other team with Ohio State's resume, and I would have been saying that's the number 4 most deserving team. It just so happened to be Ohio State. They were number 4 for me going into conference championship game weekend. TCU was number 3. TCU lost. TCU stayed 3. I think the committee got that right. Ohio State stayed 4. USC for me fell from like number 8 to number 9. I think for the committee, they fell from number 4 to number 10. Why are you dropping a team 6 spots for losing a neutral site conference championship game, a game in which my power ratings and many others out there, I think Vegas had USC favored. My numbers had Utah favored in that game. So I wasn't even expecting USC to win. Utah, of course, takes care of business. There's no way a team should, and I'm the one that's out there saying, yes, teams should be punished for losing games. Like that's why you can't just have all reward, no risk for playing the game, even though it's a bonus game with a conference championship. Teams should be punished, but they should be punished like accordingly. I'm not going to punish USC for losing to a really good power rated Utah team and knock them a ton when the teams around them didn't improve their resumes either. I think they fell 1 spot because I think I had Kansas State jump above them because Kansas State got that win over TCU, if I remember correctly, with how my numbers shook out. But the committee dropped them from 4 to 10. To me, that's the committee acknowledging we shouldn't have had them at 4 in the first place. So
that's what I was going to say.
the only way that this becomes an issue for me if Michigan's in the top 4 here already is if we get to the end of the year. Let's say Michigan blows out Penn State and goes into the Ohio State game 11-0. If Michigan loses a really, really close game to Ohio State, and that's their only loss on the year, and Ohio State goes on to the Big Ten championship, and Michigan's 11-1, and their regular season is over at that point, I don't think my numbers are going to support them being a top 4 most deserving team at that point. They could, depends on how other teams shake out. But if the committee has them, in that top 4 already, and they lose a close game, my fear is that they keep Michigan in there. And another team would be, kind of get screwed out of that because they didn't drop them far enough after losing that. So if you start too high and they don't lose enough games to fall down to where they should be, that's where we get the problem. If they lose another game and they fall down like USC did, then okay. But that's where I'd have the issue. Tyler, I've gone way too long, but I have a lot to say about that. I'm sure I'll have more to say about it after we see a ranking and we can go from there. But I feel very strongly about this first ranking because we've seen it time and time again, more so in the AP, but even in the CFP, it does. And then they're supposed to start over every week with a blank slate. And they might do that. But if you have the wrong teams up there to begin with, you're clearly misevaluating, by my numbers at least, the resumes to date. Because I start with a blank slate every single week too. I'm adding one data point and the bulk is staying the same, but I'm still starting over, but the bulk has stayed the same. Yeah. If their bulk is staying the same and you've got a team, an outlier that's in the wrong spot, that has ripple effects down the line when it actually matters in December.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think I've come around to I do think they're going to put Ohio State number 1. I think I'll be surprised at this point if they don't. I'm with you again. I hope they put Florida State number 2. I think they've earned that. I won't have an issue if Michigan is in the top 4, like you said. I think our sentiments here are pretty similar. My issue is going to be if they put Georgia in the top 4 because there's nothing from 2023 that justifies putting them in the top 4, and I will vehemently disagree with that. If you want to tell me Washington or Oklahoma or Oregon are up there, I would be okay with that because you could, I think, argue those pretty pretty realistically, I think there's no argument for Georgia to be in the top four. So I'm very curious, but I do think for sure you're going to see Ohio State, Florida State, and I think you're going to see Michigan in the top four, which I don't have a problem with. Like I said, I've got them number 3 in my resume rankings. They're a clear number 1 in my power ratings. If they're in the top four, I totally get it. But that fourth spot, if it's Washington, which I think it probably is going to be, like you said, they're undefeated, but man, they are not looking great the last couple of weeks. I don't know if Michael Penix is banged up still or what, but they've got some tough sledding down the stretch. So even if they are number 4, I think that's going to work itself out. But yeah, long story short, I think it's going to be Ohio State, Florida State, Michigan in some order, and then I think Washington will be the 4th team. But if it's Georgia, I'm not going to be happy with that because there's literally no. Show me a metric that has Georgia as a top 4 team, without saying defending national champs. That's the only justification there is, and to me, that's not a justification. But we will find out Tuesday night. So you guys should hear this, and then within hours, get to compare where Kelly and I are with what the committee did. We'll be back on our regular Thursday schedule. We'll do a hopefully brief recap of what the committee actually did. Hopefully they didn't do anything crazy and like put Georgia number 1, because I think Kelly and I both might blow our tops if that happens. But we'll be back previewing week 10. Week 10 of the college football season already here. So we will be back to preview that as always. For Kelly Ford, I'm Tyler Shoemaker, and that was Calculated Risk.